In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at building a rig using some constraints that will allow you to have your character balancing on a board that's on a ball or a cylinder. So I've created a new scene, and I'm going to choose Joint Tool. And in the Attributes Manager, under IK Chain, I want to set it to 2D. And I'll switch to a side view and draw out 3 joints. And you can see right away it creates a goal for me. So let's get this moved out just a little bit, and this as well. And I'll call this left, and call this one left goal. And I'll select the left null and choose the mirror tool from underneath the characters menu. Set my plane to world YZ because I want to mirror it across this axis. The origin also to world because it's in world space, so it'll be perfect. And for the options here, you want to have everything but weights and animation. You can probably get away with tags as well, but I have an IK tag, and even though there's an IK thing here, I'm just going to leave it on. It's not going to do me any harm. And just click mirror. Oop, forgot one thing. We're going to replace left with right. Click mirror. Now you've got 2 different nulls. And so I'm going to select both of my goals and drag them out of the hierarchies and just collapse them both. If I select both left and right here, I'll bring it down just a little bit so he's almost kneeling. So let's create the plank he'll be standing on here. Create a cube. Bring it down on the Y. Bring it in on the Z a little bit. And out on the X even further. The legs are a little far apart, so I'm going to bring them in a bit. So let's bring it in 30. Bring this in 30 as well. Just drag this down to about there, and that should do it. And now let's create the cylinder it'll rest on. I want it to be on the Z axis because it's going to be rolling across it like so. And I'll lower this radius to about 30. And just drag it just beneath it here. So I now have basically all the major components for my rig. So let's do a little bit of cleanup here. I'm going to create a null object. So let me move this over. And I want this null object to be at the base of this cube because I'm going to be constraining this null object instead of the cube. So that one's there, and I will go ahead and just create another null object that will hold it all. It doesn't matter where this one's located. This is just kind of a way to contain everything. So I'll select my cube and bring it in there as well, and this null object. And I'll make this cube a child of the null object. Now I want these 2 goals to follow the rotation of this cube. So as the cube gets rotated, along its banking axis, it should lift up the goal and cause the legs to bend. So if you can take a look here, if I do that, if I bring them up, you can see the legs are going with it, and that's just what I want. So leave those as a child there. So now let's go ahead and set up some of our constraints. So the first thing we want to do is create a clamp constraint. Actually, the first thing we want to do is group our 2 legs into another null object and call it the hips. Because if you have a character, you're going to have hips that are going to be controlling the legs as well. That's just how you're going to animate when you're balancing. As this cube would roll this way, your character's hips would want to try to counterbalance by animating this way. And what we're going to end up doing is have this null object be aiming at the hips. So as the hips move one way, the cube will respond just a bit to basically counterbalance it. So I'll select my null object, right click, choose character tags, constraint. And let's start by clamping it to the cylinder. So I'll choose clamp and choose to add a target. And the 2, we want it to clamp to the surface of our cylinder. And it doesn't need to be able to go higher or lower. We want it to stay at the exact same distance it is now, but basically clamping along the normals of the cylinder. So I want to choose normals, and Y plus is fine because that's the way it's oriented right now. And I'm going to tell it to do the Fong normals. And then I will just drag the cylinder in there. So now you can see if I move this, it begins to rotate around and controls the leg controllers. Alright, now there's another constraint I want to do here. I want to tell this null object that's constrained to the cylinder to look towards the hips. Because if as this is being animated to go along the side, you would counter animate, well, not counter animate, but basically you would animate to counterbalance that motion. So you'd bring the hips down over here. And I want my null object to kind of understand that, and so I'm going to have it aim towards it. Now I won't have it aim at 100%, otherwise I'd basically be controlling my rig through the hips. In fact, let's just go ahead and get the constraint set up and I'll show you what I mean. So in the same constraint tag, select aim, and in the aim tag, add a target. And we want to be constraining the null object's Y plus, so we want it to be looking up just like it is right at the hips. Now we only want it to constrain the B axis, or the banking rotation. So I'll turn off the H and the P. So now with those settings, I'll drag the hips into my target field. And you can see if I move the hips, the null object now aims at it. And that's not exactly what I want. I want it to have some influence, but not directly guide it. So to do that, I'll just lower the strength to about 50%. So now you can see it only slightly has an influence. And lastly, let's automate the motion of the cylinder so it looks like he's balancing as we play back in the viewport. So I'll select my cylinder, right click, choose Cinema 4D tags, and then choose the vibrate tag. And we're just going to enable position and lower the frequency to about 1.5. So now if you play in the viewport, you see, let me increase the time here to about 1500 just so I have a bit of breathing room. You can see that now if I animate the hips, I can bring them down and have them influence the cube just a bit. So if I keep them over here, you'll see the cube is more likely to stay over here than if I bring it all the way over here. You can see it's more than likely not going to go all the way to the other side. So it has some influence as you animate. So you can basically be animating the hips to try to stay balanced on this board.